Welcome to the Enlightened Pet Behavior Podcast. I'm your host, Susan Light. In a world overflowing with conflicting advice and often misguided information, my mission is to be your trusted source for accurate, kind, and truly effective strategies to understand and shape your pet's behavior. Join me as we shed light on common challenges and work to foster a deeper, more harmonious bond with our beloved furry family members. If you find the show helpful and enjoyable, please consider showing your support, subscribing, following, rating, reviewing, and sharing with friends. It just takes a moment, but it significantly boosts the show's visibility and helps more pet parents discover it. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. Today, I'm bringing you a special encore episode. This is an episode all the way back from season 1, and it is my most listened to episode ever. That's because not only is it a topic that is very relevant to a lot of pet parents, but it's because my guest does such an amazing job explaining it. The topic is reactivity, and I know it's something most pet parents deal with on some level with their dogs. It's no surprise my guest does an amazing job with the topic. She's a Karen Pryor Academy faculty member, meaning she teaches trainers the principles of behavior science and clicker training. She is a certified dog trainer and dog behavior consultant, and the owner of JW Dog Training in the Washington, D.C. area. When she's not training private clients or teaching her KPA students, she works with brands and media outlets to educate the public about dog training and behavior. She's the author of the book Manage It, Hacks for Improving Your Dog's Behavior, which, by the way, she came on the show last season to talk about. So if you're interested in learning more about management, check that episode out. Without further ado, please welcome Juliana DeWillems. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about reactivity because all over your page, even this morning I saw there's more videos you guys have
I literally just posted one. I was like, this is so timely.
Yeah, just because we're just seeing more and more and more reactive dogs. And you've been in the business a while. Have you seen a lot? Do you think it's just the pandemic, or is this a trend that was starting before?
Well, because I'm in DC, I see, I think, way more than usual just because it's so dense. And so it's not like the suburbs where you can avoid dogs a little bit more. But I also think the volume of dogs has gone up during the pandemic. So naturally, not only are you going to get more dogs to react to, but then you're going to get a bigger pool of dogs who might be more reactive. So I think the pandemic is, I'm sure, making it a little bit worse.
Yeah, I think so for sure. So for everybody that's listening that's not a dog professional, what are we talking about when we say reactivity or a reactive dog?
Great question, because it is so important to define reactivity because that's a label. And so what does that look like? So really, for me, reactivity is any overreaction to a stimulus. And so that can look like barking, lunging, growling, pulling strongly against the leash. I think anytime the dog is having a reaction that is not just calmly looking, that can be kind of under the umbrella of reactivity.
Okay. I noticed one thing you didn't say is biting. At the point where a dog is delivered a bite, would you consider that an aggressive dog as opposed to a reactive dog, or it's a reactive dog that's just gone a little bit further?
So, and it all really it kind of comes down to semantics, and there aren't like complete and official definitions for either. Some people will say that aggression is any distance increasing behavior. Some people will say that aggression is quote unquote intent to do harm, which could also look like reactivity. Aggression to me is anytime a dog, I think, does harm or to me, aggression can also be asking for space because that looks like growling and air snapping and biting with little contact. So I guess what can be helpful there too is we back it up and we look at the behaviors we're seeing instead of kind of the labels. And so, again, like the biting, yes, that is considered aggression, but is that an aggressive dog? No, I don't think so. I think that's a dog who's displaying aggression.
Mm-hmm. And usually it's fairly, wow, it's so early in the morning. My coffee is not absorbed in my bloodstream yet. So I'm on the West Coast, so it's only 6 a.m. But,
oh my gosh. Wow.
What I'm saying, so usually that aggression is not generalized. It's usually more specific. If a dog was aggressive all the time towards everyone, that dog would be put down. But a lot of the cases that seek out help of consultants are in general really lovely family dogs that then have moments of aggression that they want to address.
Right. Well, and I think that's really important to remember is that most, again, kind of quote unquote cases of aggression are dogs who, when things are okay in their world and they feel comfortable, they're not showing those aggressive behaviors. Again, lunging, growling, snarling, air snapping, biting with contact, any of those. But it is that 3% of the time where they do feel threatened enough or they go over threshold enough that they might bite. And so you can have a dog who is reactive on leash, who doesn't bite, or you can have a dog who's reactive on leash most of the time who can bite. And that's where like kind of labels and generalizing gets really hard and tricky and almost dangerous because every single dog is going to be different.
Yeah, which is why it's important to bring in a pro for these kind of situations, because we can look at it and sort of zero in on what we're seeing and see all of the things on the way up to the more extreme. Like we see the things that are less extreme when people think, oh, they're fine. We're like, I don't know. Look at those ears. Look at the panting. They're licking their lips and yawning. We can see the more subtle signs and try to help you identify
Absolutely.
that stuff.
Right. And that's such a good point that body language is so important in anything, whether you're talking about reactivity or aggression or fear or anxiety, whatever it is. Body language is like number one, I feel like, in terms of owner education and what professionals bring to the table, because you can, based on what the dog is saying with their body language, you can get a much, much, much better idea of what's going on instead of waiting just for those intense instances of biting or big reactions.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've defined it, let's talk about what you do about it. What do you do when you have a dog that, for instance, like the video that I just saw this morning? I want to remind everybody you can find Juliana on jwdogtraining.com and her Instagram and her Facebook. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes. And she posts a lot of great videos and about reactivity and a lot of other topics. But so the one that I saw this morning where the dog was, lunging and barking at the end of the leash, and now she's looking at a dog. In this case, that was what she was overreacting to, and then looking back at her mom for a treat. How do you get there? What's the in-between?
Wow. The kind of question we always get, well, where do I start? What do I do? So a couple things. One, reactivity, so again, kind of the label, is stemming from an emotional place. And what people are surprised to hear is it's often rooted in fear, which can feel, for kind of the average dog owner who has a reactive dog, they're like, well, excuse me, what? My dog looks so like big and bad and confident. What do you mean that they're scared? And so understanding that reactivity is often driven by fear is so important, because that's helpful to understand when we go to then treat the problem, because what's most important with reactivity is getting to the root of the issue and that emotional response that is driving the behavior. And some reactivity is rooted in also frustration, which I think is more common in adolescents, teenagers who get really frustrated when they can't greet. And that frustration looks a lot like barking, lunging at the end of the leash, but it's not as much rooted in fear, but it is still quote unquote reactivity. And the reason that I bring that up is just because while most reactivity is fear, I do want to acknowledge that sometimes it can be frustration. But either way, you still have to deal with that underlying frustration or that underlying fear. And
Mm-hmm.
so reactivity that is rooted in fear is based on a negative conditioned response. The dog sees another dog or a bike or a person, whatever it is, and they go, "Ooh, I don't like seeing that. I'm really scared. I need to make sure it goes away. I really don't want them to come any closer." And so you have to deal with that conditioned response and try to change it from negative to positive so that they go, "Oh, there's a dog. I like seeing dogs. Okay, that's not so bad."
Mm-hmm.
Because when you deal with the underlying issues for reactivity, you then start to see the symptoms, that barking, lunging, snarling, whatever. You'll start to see those decrease because your dog is feeling way more comfortable and not like they have to, quote unquote, act out or react every time they see a dog.
Yeah, trying to change the way that they feel about it, not necessarily teaching them a command like sit, stay, heel. We're trying to actually condition the response that's happening to them that they have no control over.
Right. And what's so important to remember is that a lot of the times our dogs are having almost a panic response. So dogs have three, well, kind of four options when they get scared: fight, flight, or freeze. They also have fidget, less known. But when you've got kind of fight, flight, or freeze, and you're scared of something and you're stuck on a leash, you're often going to choose that fight option because you can't flight, you can't move away, and the threat is just too much for you to freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And so when our dogs are in that panic state and their brain is telling them, alert, alert, there's a threat, take care of yourself, save yourself. There is no thinking or learning, reasoning, processing or thinking through the regular training that they know. They cannot do that when they're panicked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important for humans to try to empathize with this and think about a moment that you're really scared, or like for me, I absolutely hate snakes. I can't even like see one on social media or on TV. I mean, they just totally freak me out. And if I'm walking on a trail and I notice that I'm about to step on a snake, I mean, you should see me. I'm like screaming, I'm jumping around. Before I even realize what's going on, my body has thrown me into this physiological response of panic because my brain is saying, alert, alert, there is a major threat. And so for someone to try in that moment to say, "Hey, tell me your multiplication tables. Hey,
Right.
what's 6 times 12?" Absolutely not. There would be absolutely no way for me to do that because the fear part of my brain is taking over and I cannot think. So you have to address that underlying fear and emotional response before you can start asking for known behaviors, because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately we are hoping to get a new response, a new behavior choice from our dogs, but they're never going to be able to offer that behavior choice or respond correctly to that behavior choice if they're still operating in kind of terror mode.
Right. And so when we're working through these, when you're giving owners exercises to work through these and you're showing them, and I say when we're giving owners exercises because this is not something that can be treated with the trainer once a week. Like it needs to be managed so your dog stops experiencing that flood of fear every day when you're not there, uh, and also worked with the owner every day if they can. In my opinion.
Right.
Or do you prefer that they wait until you're there?
That's a good question. So, well, you bring up a really important point that management is so critical in the behavior modification process because, yeah, basically exactly like you said, if once a week you're working with a trainer and it's going well, but then your other 6 walks during the week, your dog is practicing that reactivity and experiencing that stressor and that trigger over and over again, progress might not happen at all, or at the very least, it's going to be very slow.
Yeah.
So, in between your training sessions, you're going to want to manage and avoid dogs or avoid whatever your dog's trigger is as much as you possibly can, because that means that instead of one good experience and 6 bad experiences a week, your dog might only be having one good experience and then no other experiences, which is much, much, much better.
Mm-hmm.
And, I completely empathize with dog owners who have reactive dogs that it can be an exhausting training process. And there are going to be
Mm-hmm.
times when you don't want to train. And during those times, that's fine. Your walks are just going to be full of management. You're going to be hiding behind cars, ducking up alleys, going on routes where you know you're not going to see dogs, tossing treats in the grass for your dog to notice instead of paying attention to the dog. I mean, there's a wide range of management options, but those are really, really important in the training process. You're not just going to go and expose your dog over and over and over again while you're working.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then the exercises that you would generally give to
Yes.
reactive dogs. Let's talk about that. And when we're talking about keeping the word, we haven't actually said it yet, but the word we're generally talking about is keeping them under threshold, keeping them in that place before they're in that huge fight, flight, freeze response, before all those chemicals are flooding their brain and they just can't think straight. So really important to be watching as you're working your dog's body language.
Absolutely. And I so appreciate you bringing that up. And that's the thing about kind of talking about the label of reactivity is there are so many pieces. And it's nice when you have an extended amount of time, like a longer podcast to talk about it, but there's still going to be things that we forget to mention or we don't mention.
Sure.
But yes, threshold is so critical to keep track of and understand when working with a dog who shows reactive behaviors, because again, once they get into that fight or flight zone, they can't think or learn. So we have to keep them under threshold, meaning they have to be able to perceive the trigger because they have to be able to see it so we can train around it, but
Mm-hmm.
not totally lose their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And some people listening to this might be thinking, well, my dog doesn't have a threshold. They immediately go over threshold. And, you really want to think to yourself, okay, well, does that mean that it's 2 blocks? Does that mean it's half of a football field? That's okay. You just have to know where to start because that's where your training has to happen for there to be any progress made.
Mm-hmm. So for some people, they might get a little confused because we don't want to see the reaction and then react to it ourselves. A successful, generally we call them setups, a successful setup, it doesn't look like anything almost because the dog is comfortable and the dog is not
Absolutely.
reacting.
Right. The, all that sensationalized training. I mean, training that you see on TV where you're getting these big reactions and you're having to, oh no, control the dog. I mean, of course you're going to have slip ups where your dog goes over threshold, but absolutely in a perfect world, your training happens in a very boring, low key, relaxed way. So, and it all comes down to basically, I mean, 2 things, and kind of the way that I've approached reactivity has changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but
Oh,
it's
great.
about helping your dog feel more comfortable around the trigger. So basically
Mm-hmm.
trying to associate the trigger with something your dog really loves.
Mm-hmm.
And the sequence of that is super important. Your dog has to notice the scary thing before you present the thing that they love, which is typically food and high value food, something really, really tasty. And so your dog has to go, oh, there's a dog. And you say, yes, but look at this amazing cheese. And they're like, wait, that's weird. But then you do it again. And they're like, but there's a dog. And you said, yes, but cheese. And then over time, if we can be consistent, your dog starts to realize, oh, every time I see a dog, good stuff happens for me. Huh, maybe seeing dogs actually isn't so bad. And that's a process called counter conditioning. And you can achieve counter conditioning a few different ways. You can come at it from a training perspective or do straight counter conditioning. And I don't want to bore everybody necessarily with the science, but basically you have to have the scary thing predict good consequences for your dog.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you said usually it's like ridiculously tasty, high value food. But there are other ways to reinforce it as well, correct? Like when I was reading Grisha Stewart's Bat 2.0 book, in her opinion, just putting some distance between them and the trigger can also be reinforcing. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of times our dogs, when they're showing that reaction, they're saying, I would like to get out of here, please. And so reinforcing that with some distance from the trigger can be enormously helpful. And I would absolutely recommend everyone check out Grisha Stewart's BAT program because it's just a great program and there's a lot of really helpful takeaways for reactive dogs.
yeah, absolutely. And so when you're saying that the sequence is really, really important, they have to notice them first. So then the difference would be from that and management. So when you were talking about the other things of like, hey, let's scatter some treats over here so they don't notice it. Let's turn around. Hopefully, if they start to notice it and go over threshold and you're trying to make distance, would you use different treats? Would you use, or are we just messing up the sequence there at that point?
So ideally with management, again, in a perfect world, your dog doesn't even realize that a dog is there. So I'll use whatever I need to kind of get their head down and focused on something else away from a trigger to just get past a trigger with just they don't even perceive it because that closes the door to the opportunity for a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people will, and it can be helpful to have a super special treat that only shows up with dogs. Like you've got your regular training treats, but then you pull out like deli turkey when a dog shows up, which can be great. But I also really like to keep in mind the human end of it and knowing that you're already juggling so much. And so to know what treat to pull out when, especially when you're trying to get your timing right, because a lot of times you only have a fraction of a second between when your dog perceives a trigger and when you can intervene and get that food to them to prevent a reaction.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that the treats that we're going to use are easily accessible and you can just grab and feed, grab and feed, grab and feed instead of having to worry about, oh no, this is the lower value treat, or oh wait, I need to manage here, so I don't want to grab my higher value treat. So it can be helpful to have a super special, high valued, super tasty dog only treat. But regardless of when you're out on a walk, you always want to have pretty much high value stuff. So if you have to use some sometimes for scattering to manage, or you have to use some sometimes for seeing dogs, we want our dogs to be able to eat that out in the environment no matter what.
Yeah. And if you're in that place where they won't take the treat, you're too close to the trigger.
Right. And that is something that we hear so often with reactive dog training or training around distractions is, well, my dog won't eat. Okay, well, then they are definitely over threshold, even if it doesn't look like they're barking and lunging yet. If your dog isn't eating, that's a physiological response. Their brain is telling them, nope, we cannot worry about digesting right now. We have to be, we need to worry about the threat. And so you want to make sure that you add distance there as well, because if your dog's not eating, you've got no working room, right? You've got no wiggle room there, workability to change their association, get better behavior, anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So add some distance there. And unfortunately, you have to be the one that's scanning the environment and trying to catch these things before your dog does.
Right.
So that you can find that perfect spot where they notice, but they're not reacting yet.
Yeah. And I tell people to, yes, you need to scan the environment so you can keep track, but look at your dog to notice when they react, because a way that attempting reactive training can backfire is if you try to get the treats to your dog before they notice the trigger, and soon the classical conditioning actually works in reverse and works against you, where your dog sees you starting to get the treats ready and they think to themselves, oh shoot, where's the threat? Oh no, where is it? And they start scanning. And so you've actually poisoned your treat, and it is not only is it no longer effective, your dog is actually more anxious because you have become something you're doing, going for the treats, offering treats has become a predictor that there's a threat in the environment. So I tell people to kind of keep their eye on their dog out of the, you're looking ahead, but always kind of have an eye on your dog. And when you see that furrowed brow and those ears forward, that's usually a pretty good indicator that they've noticed something. And that's a great opportunity to say, hey, thanks for noticing and staying calm. Here's your treat. Because then you're kind of feeding two birds with one seed. If they see something that they're worried about, you can add food to the equation and do a little bit of counter conditioning. And if they see something they're worried about and have not yet reacted, you can add food to the equation, which ultimately reinforces that choice to stay calm. So it's a double whammy in a good way.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting how easy it is to screw that up.
Yes. And it's unfortunate because, the thing about people who say they don't get results with this type of training, whether it's trying to use food or counter condition, or, use positive reinforcement in some way, a lot of times it just comes down to a mechanics and a timing issue. And if you screw those up, you're absolutely not going to make progress, unfortunately. And that's where working with a professional is so important, because that professional can be there to clean up your timing. It doesn't matter if you understand the you understand what you should be doing. Applying it practically out in the real world is much harder.
Absolutely. And what would you do if that's been already poisoned and just reaching for the treat bag is stressing the dog out? Do you take a little break from training for a couple weeks? Can that reset it? Or what do you do as the trainer at that point?
Great question. I think that, yeah, I mean, we'd have to switch gears, right? The definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So, and that's what's, I think, really important from a trainer perspective. We have to have a few different ways to, if not more than a few, right? We have to have different options for kind of approaching reactivity issues, reactive dog issues, because it might not, one dog might not kind of soak it up the same way another dog does, or one dog might have a bad history with that type of training, and so it's poisoned or it's not making progress. And so we have to be able to pivot. I think, yes, taking a break is really good. And just really, really practicing the person's mechanics so that the sequence is just cleaned up and much better, kind of back to the way that it should be.
We are going to take a short break. You can find more of Juliana and JW Dog Training at their website, jwdogtraining.com, on Instagram at JW Dog Training, and on Facebook, JW Dog Training and Behavior. I will have links to all of those in the show notes. We'll be right back. And so we've mostly been talking about reactivity on leash while you're outside of the home. Let's take it up a notch of difficulty and talk about reactivity inside the home that we're seeing. Maybe like dog reactivity. A lot of people got a second dog during the pandemic, or even dog human reactivity. I know when I was a kid, we had this black lab that we all adored, but he hated my brother. And my brother had moved out at that point, but anytime he came over, he would just bark and lunge at my brother. And we just started putting him in a room when Scott was there. But, what do you do when it's not on leash outside, when it's inside the home?
So the good news is that the concept still applies, where the reactions that you're seeing, the reactive behaviors, or at that point, if a dog is, actively trying to bite somebody, we would more commonly categorize that as aggression. That is all coming from a place, especially inside the home, of typically fear. Like, oh my gosh, why are you in my house? I don't feel comfortable with this. I don't like this. I'm scared. I want to make you go away. Mm-hmm. And so you have to address, again, that underlying issue. But especially in the home, it's absolutely critical to put management in place, exactly like you did, where you've got a room that the dog can go into, or somewhere where you can keep everyone safe, especially initially in the interaction when the person is first coming over and you're getting everything settled. If there's any risk that that dog might react or aggress in those moments, we have to take the dog out of the equation to keep everyone safe and prevent the rehearsal of the behavior. Mm-hmm. And then what you can do is you would bring the dog out for short amounts of time and apply any training that you plan to do. Again, safely. You would probably want to have the dog on leash, because distance is really important, having the dog far enough away where they can notice the person or the other dog or whatever, but not react, and be able to apply that same counter conditioning. Hey, when you look or see that other person or dog that makes you uncomfortable, that you don't like, that makes you scared, you get good stuff. So you start to feel much more comfortable with their presence.
Yeah. So just basically the same technique. You just, unfortunately, it's not just when you're out on a walk, it's all the time that you have to manage in between.
Yeah. And that, I mean, when a dog is reacting to somebody who lives in the family or another dog, a couple things there. I think those are cases where it is really important to, I mean, at the very least, bring in a certified trainer or behavior consultant, and then consider seeing a veterinary behaviorist, because for me, that almost comes into a quality of life issue for either the dog who's reacting, or the dog or the people or dogs on kind of the receiving end of the reactivity, because that's not safe or fair way to live, to kind of always either be on edge because the dog is scared and that's why they're reacting, or again, for the other dogs, always being scared of that dog. So I think it's really important to get very, very fast and effective intervention there to figure out some type of relief for everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a little bit of a depressing question. Do you think it usually can all be treated, or there are just times when both of those dogs are not going to be able to live in that home and get along, or worst case scenario, if it, you end up with a very aggressive dog, that they can't all be treated and sometimes there's behavioral euthanasia? Or do you think that if with the right interventions every dog is capable of change?
Whew, loaded question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one, it's so important to note that all dogs are individuals in kind of their ability to soak up behavior modification and respond to training.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, all environments are different.
Yeah.
No two families or household environments are going to be the same. And there are so many factors that go into success, both again with the dog and the people's personality, and the kind of how committed the owners are to managing and training,
Mm-hmm.
how quickly and how intensely. So you always want to do a risk assessment. What have the injuries been? What damage can the dog do? Has the dog done? And what are the triggers? Are they identifiable? Are they avoidable? There are so many factors. And what is really important to note, though, when it comes to really dangerous cases where risk is really high and you're managing and you're saying, okay, well, we can keep them separate. We say in the training world, management always fails, always.
Mm.
It doesn't matter. I have a client who is just so insanely obsessive about her management, and she's so type A. I mean, this woman does training all day long. She's so on top of it. And even she's like I joke with her, she's like a helicopter mom. I mean, she's so neurotic about it. But, and even with her, management has failed a few times. And she's even floored herself that she's kind of let it happen. But the thing is, she's human. And
Yeah.
there is absolutely no avoiding that management will one day fail. Someone will keep the gate open. A latch will not close at some point. It will fail. And you have to think about what will happen when it does fail, because if that risk is really high and you're looking at severe injury or death, should management fail, obviously that's a huge factor in if the animal can safely live in that home or
Yeah.
any home.
Yeah. And that includes a muzzle, which is obviously something that a lot of dogs can use for a little layer of management. Do you often recommend muzzles as a layer of management while dogs are working through reactivity, or do you think it's not usually necessary?
Yeah, I think muzzles are a great tool. Again, it kind of depends on the scenario with the dog and when we're seeing the reactions and what type of behavior and what the triggers are and stuff like that. But a muzzle can be a really great way to safely work on training without putting anyone at risk. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important to condition them properly and make sure the dog feels totally comfortable when wearing it, and you're not just slapping it on their face and saying, deal with it, because that can actually suppress behavior, which
Yes.
we certainly don't want our dogs to be too uncomfortable to show us how they're feeling. That's not going to get to the root of the issue. And so we want to make sure our dogs are super comfortable, and then using it for training when necessary. I don't love the idea of a dog living in the muzzle. I
Right.
think that has not my really my preference there. I would like it more to be used for kind of short amounts of time where the dogs can be, maybe you're trying to reintegrate dogs or trying to introduce them to a new person, and it can be used then as just an extra layer of safety. And it's important to note that the muzzle should have space for them to pant, drink water, and eat treats.
Absolutely. And that a dog should not be left unattended in a muzzle. So this
Right.
is not a
Yep.
layer of
Big
management
time.
where you put them in the muzzle and send them out to the backyard and you go to work. Uh,
No.
this is while you're training or while you're walking or while you're actively involved, the dog can wear the muzzle. And there's,
Absolutely.
I did a whole episode on muzzles. So if that's something you're interested in, check that out. Talk about how to introduce it correctly to a dog. I remembered what I was going to ask about, or was going to mention at the very least, which is that you said when you're working with, sorry, I slip it into aggression. When you're working with reactivity in the house, that it's so important to put the dog on the leash. And it always amazes me how surprised people are at just the very idea of a dog in the house on a leash. But it's a great tool for all kinds of training. So when you have a puppy that's learning house manners and you're trying to give them like a little bit more freedom, I recommend them being on a leash in the house. So for some reason, it just, people never make that connection that they can use the leash inside the house, but you should.
Absolutely.
You absolutely should.
Totally. For safety, it's really important because it prevents the dog from approaching whatever you don't want it to approach, but also it really controls the dog and dog's environment. So the number of choices the dog has to make immediately goes down. And so the choice is like, basically to be near you or maybe check in with you or settle near you and nothing else. And so that means that you've got way more opportunities to reinforce behavior you like, and they're practicing good choices and building good habits. And so, yes, absolutely, a leash for both safety and for getting more desirable behavior is so, so, so important.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you just barely touched on, but I want to really make sure people hear it, is when we're talking about your dog communicating these space creating behaviors, snarling and growling, a lot of owners I don't want to say out of habit, but out of unfortunately incorrect instinct, they punish dogs for growling. So many owners discourage their dogs from growling, and that is a huge mistake because like you said, we want to know how your dog is feeling. And if they get to a growl, then you want to respond to that and give them some space and not be like, don't growl, stop that. Because they will learn not to growl. And that is where every time people are like, they just bit somebody out of nowhere, it's because you told them not to growl. So they skipped that step and went straight to the bite.
Absolutely. I call growling your smoke detector. It tells you that there is a fire happening. And if you do not diffuse the situation, things could get much worse. And so we actually really appreciate when our dogs growl and tell us that they're uncomfortable. Now, I'm not going around saying just let your dog growl at you all the time. Obviously, that is not, right. I'm not saying that, but it is so critical in that moment when your dog is growling to say, oh, okay, you're uncomfortable. Let me stop what I'm doing. Take note of what's going on and plan to proactively train for that scenario next time.
And right then, give them some space. Create
yes,
some
yes, yes, definitely.
Yep.
Well, it could be, whether if they're growling at you, you would back off. If they're growling at somebody else, you would call them away, make sure that they move away, or if, a lot of times dogs growl at children because the children just move weird and scare them and invade their space. And so you could tell the child to back off. You could tell the stranger wanting to approach your dog to back off. But yes, absolutely. In that moment, we want to say, whoa, okay, thank you for letting me know. Let me take care of you here.
And so I always say also that there's a scale of behavior, and we can start to notice these things before they get to the growl if we're watching. But if you've missed all of them and you get to the growl, like you said, that's the smoke detector. That's your last chance, because that's when they're like, okay, I'm going to deal with this situation now. And they're going to take it to a place that you don't like. So let's talk about that body language on the way up to the growl. You already mentioned the ears pointing towards the stimulus. If you have a dog breed with those ears that move around a lot, you can get a lot of information from their ears. If you don't, unfortunately, that's one of the things you can't look for. If you have a dog with docked ears or floppy ears. But if you have a dog with those ears that can move around, you can get a lot of information about where your dog's focus is from the ears. What are the other ones
right.
What we want them to look for before we get to the growl?
So some more subtle signs are lip licking and yawning, which are two things that, one, when I tell people to look for them, they say my dog doesn't do that, and then finally we start looking for them, and it turns out their dog does them quite a bit. You don't realize your dog is doing it, or you don't know it means anything until you know what to look for. So lip licking, it's just a little tongue flick, and often happens when their mouth is closed because they're holding some tension, and so that can be a really, really early indicator that they're just kind of they're thinking, no, I don't know what's going on, or I don't totally love this. Yawning, shaking off when they're not wet, that is an indicator that they had some type of tension built up that they wanted to dissipate and get rid of, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Whale eyes, so if they're stiff but they are looking to one side and you can see the whites of their eyes, that again shows increased tension. A tucked tail is a really good indicator that they are nervous. And on the other end of that, a tail that's flagged all the way over their body, so really, really high and curled over, or standing straight up, that's called a flagged tail, and that indicates arousal.
Mm-hmm.
And if a dog's tail is wagging, it doesn't always mean that they're happy and comfortable. A tail can be up high and wagging, and that's again called a flagged tail with a flagged wag. And that can just indicate arousal, concern, interest. The tough thing about body language is it's very context specific, and it also can be dog specific. So it's important to look at kind of the whole dog and to understand and know your dog's baseline.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But those are the things that you are going to want to try to learn and start paying attention for as you're trying to find that sweet spot where the dog notices something and you can give them that, oh, but here's the chicken or the cheese, and then we're moving on.
Yeah. And so again, if your dog's baseline is ears kind of to the side, their mouth is open, their facial expression is relaxed, and that's what they look like when they're just hanging out and nothing is happening, that's important to know, because then when you're walking and you notice, okay, they close their mouth, their ears are forward, their brow is furrowed, okay, they've definitely noticed something. I'm even noticing their tail is really high. Maybe that mohawk, that erection is happening on the back of their neck. That's a physiological response to kind of arousal and building tension. And so these are all indicators, oh, they're noticing something. And it could be anything from they're just noticing to, oh, they're noticing and they're concerned and they're about to react. But that absolutely is the sweet spot where we're going to intervene and try to help them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there anything about reactivity that we didn't cover that you wanted to go into?
So I feel like for me, I kind of mentioned before, reactivity has, I've kind of changed the way that I think about it in the last couple of years, because for me, seeing progress with reactivity, I've seen the most progress with my clients when they have a strong training foundation outside of the reactivity. And I'm not talking necessarily about sit, stay, stuff like that. I'm just talking about default focus and attention to the person, meaning your dog chooses to check in with you and look back at you, and they get heavily rewarded for that all the time. And I think when you have attention and looking up at the person be your dog's choice, whether you ask for it, whether you don't ask for it, regardless of what's going on, that's one of the fastest ways to really get a handle on reactivity, because in between the moments when you might be doing that counter conditioning and feeding for noticing the trigger and stuff like that, your dog is looking back at you and checking in with you. And that is the incompatible replacement behavior that we're ultimately one day looking for your dog to see a trigger and look back at you. And that happens so much faster if you have a really, really strong foundation for it outside of when the trigger happens.
That's great.
And I think because of what that does is it really strengthens your relationship. I mean, training in general can strengthen your relationship, but when you're really, really rewarding and making it worth it to your dog to kind of default to you and turn to you and look to you and say, hey, what do I do here? What's next? What are we doing? I don't know what else to do, so I'm going to choose this because it usually works for me. It really does create this connection with your dog and this engagement from them and from you to them, where I've seen just that connection allows you to make progress much faster, because also your dog might react a little bit, but as soon as their brain comes back and they're kind of back down to earth a little bit, that threat is low enough, they snap right back to that behavior that has been working for them, which is looking back at you. And what a beautiful replacement behavior for any type of reactivity than for them, again, to kind of gaze up at you and just check in while you're walking. And so people think that training at home or training when there's no triggers around, that how could that possibly translate? But I actually think it is so incredibly valuable to work at home and on your walks when there isn't anything around, because that gives your dog a strong reinforcement history of that looking up at you behavior that they're more likely to then pull from when there is some type of threat or trigger around.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that reminds me of the video you posted this morning where the dog was being taught to sniff on cue.
Yeah, totally.
As a replacement behavior for, the reaction. Is that a common thing that you try to do, or that was specific to that dog?
So anytime that we're working with reactivity, I mean, we've talked so much about dealing with the emotional response, but then pretty quickly you need to switch into, okay, well, what do we want our dog to do instead?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where a lot of times I'll focus on looking back at you. But for this particular dog, he is very hypervigilant to his surroundings. So he's constantly looking around. And while sniffing is so good for dogs, and usually the problem is, oh, my dog sniffs too much, this dog is so concerned about what's going on in the environment that he won't sniff. And sniffing is an incredibly calming behavior for dogs. It's so helpful to lower their heart rate. It gets them focused on something that's not the outside environment. And so for this particular dog, I said, we were still working on a lot of that engagement and checking in and stuff like that, but we're also practicing getting him sniffing and getting his nose down and focused on something else for brief amounts of time. Because yes, I think for him right now, that's a great replacement behavior to reacting. And then when we can get his anxiety levels down overall and we have sniffing as a tool when we need it, we'll transition to seeing, okay, now can he choose to engage with the owner and check back with the owner when things get a little harder.
Nice. Very nice. Do you ever use leave it for things out on leash?
I'm so glad you asked. So I am a trainer who I actually like to take cues and my voice out of the equation as much as possible. Meaning okay. I do a lot of capturing of behaviors, and meaning the dog offers it and I mark it with a yes or a clicker and I reward it, because I don't want to have to, at every stimulus, cue, leave it, leave it, leave it, leave it. Like, I feel like I would be saying that the whole walk, because of a lot of our environments, there's just so much that I want the dog to ignore or to look away from. And so I like to set up the training and to build that foundation where that dog is making the choice themselves and I can capture and reinforce it. And do I think using leave it is bad? No, my personal preference is I want that dog making that choice themselves. And Leslie McDevitt says, I want the dog to become a reporter, not a reactor. I want the dog to know to engage with me when they see something, to make that choice on themselves. So down the road, I might not even notice something. And suddenly I see my dog looking up at me and I say, oh, what are you seeing in the environment? You must be seeing something, because if you see a trigger and look back at me, you get something good. And so it becomes a default behavior they do on their own, and I can take myself out of the equation. And another reason that this helps is that if we're capturing a lot and we're just reinforcing good choices, that when I do need to use my voice, which of course I do at times, mm-hmm. it's much more relevant to the dog because they haven't been hearing it for the last 10 minutes on the walk. I'm just using my marker and reinforcer to communicate what I like. And then when I have to say, hey, Fluffy, or something, mm-hmm. where I need something from them in that moment, then they're like, oh my gosh, you're using your voice? Whoa, you must really, really need something. And I feel like for me, it has been much more effective than talking to them the whole time. And then when I really need something from them, they're like, at that point, I'm like Charlie Brown's teacher. Like, what do they care what I'm saying? Wah, 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 wah. Like they're like, yeah, cool. I hear that voice all the time. What do I care? So I find it more effective to keep my voice out of it until I really need it.
I love that. And this is why always we say, don't repeat cues, which is very, very right. hard for people, mm-hmm. because you do just become noise. And, I've heard stories where like a dog would the owner said like, sit. And like, they literally wouldn't do it until the third time. Like right. they had been taught that was the cue, was 3 sits. So,
Totally.
yeah.
And that's such a good point, because if we're cueing leave it, maybe while our dog is reacting, or they're close to over threshold, or they are over threshold, then yeah, they're practicing ignoring us. And I certainly don't want that at all. So I would just rather take my voice out of the equation and do a lot of foundation training, teaching my dog that when they choose to look at me, or when they choose to check in, or they choose to sit, when I stop, or when they make these good choices, it really, really works out with that for them, with some tasty treats.
Yeah. And is that also a way to sort of avoid reactivity? Like if you start this as a puppy and you're just rewarding every time they're checking in with you, um, that default focus to you, do you find that that helps keep reactivity from showing up sometimes? Or
1,000% yes. If I tell, like, whether you're adopting a new dog or you're bringing a puppy home, the one thing I would recommend is just teach your dog to look at you and default attention to you, not being cued, right? Where they know that if they happen to look up at you at some point, it's likely going to work out for them, because what that does is it takes their focus away from the environment, and it makes you the best thing, and it makes you the provider of information, and it makes you access to fun parts of the environment or something. And so to default to you first, and you might then say, like, you've got a young social dog, you might say, okay, go say hi to that dog, or go sniff, or giving them access to an area where they maybe can, like, I don't know, chase squirrels or something. But you are the provider of good things, and they just learn to default their focus to you. Absolutely 100%, I think, can provide. I mean, your dog still might develop a little bit of fear reactivity down the road, but you've got such a good foundation that it's going to be so much easier. And it definitely, like, so much can prevent the frustration-based reactivity, because there's no frustration, because your dog knows to check in with you instead of becoming obsessed with other dogs or pulling towards other dogs.
yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought us back to the frustration, because I was going to ask, do you think that the skills that sort of build their frustration tolerance and the correct word for this is eluding me, building their impulse control, there we go,
Mm-hmm.
the impulse control building skills, especially for like the adolescent dogs, are going to also help with that kind of frustration reactivity, to where they're working on, sit stays, leave it, drop it's, to build their impulse controls, maybe even quiet? Or do you find they don't really translate?
So I think it can, as long as you're practicing it in the context of, at that point, you're just teaching regular skills and applying them around much harder distractions. So I think it can help, but I mean, a lot of times what falls apart is when the owner, you teach sit, stay at home, and then you go and try to apply it at the park, and you've skipped 100 steps of
Right.
slowly increasing distractions. And so it falls apart. What I find more useful when it comes to preventing frustration in social dogs who love other dogs is, again, teaching that default back to you, so that you're always the step between going to say hi to another dog. And so if they check in with you and you pass a dog that time, great, it works out for them, no big deal. Or if they check in with you and you coo to go say hi, that's great too. But you're actually removing the expectation that they get to approach dogs every single time, or even most of the time on leash, which I think removing that expectation to that they get to say hi to dogs on leash is one of the best ways to prevent frustration-based reactivity. Because that a reactivity, like, to anthropomorphize it, would be like, oh, I want to just get to the dog. I want to go say hi. I want to go say hi.
Yeah.
And so if we take away that want to say hi, because they're like, yeah, I see a dog over there, but I'm cool hanging here and getting food from you, because I know I get plenty of dog time off leash, then I think for me, I feel like that is better at preventing that frustration-based reactivity. But if you have some other cues, like other quote-unquote obedience stuff that you practice a lot, and your dog, it's all taught with positive reinforcement, your dog loves to do it, your dog loves to work, and you apply that around harder and harder places with more distractions, including other dogs, then I think that could be effective as well.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Was there anything else before we wrap up that we didn't get to?
I don't think so. I just want to urge everyone to seek out, certified professional trainers or behavior consultants if you have any issues with reactivity, fear, aggression, anxiety. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but there's a lot of also bad information out there that will make things harder for you. So just certified professionals, make sure you're seeking them out.
So true. So true. And the fact that you don't legally, it's not regulated, so people don't have to be certified. And that's why
Right.
Juliana is saying, check the credential of the person that you're hiring, because
Right.
certifications exist, but they're not required for people to say, oh yeah, I can help with a jog. I'm a trainer. I'm a baby, whatever.
Right.
But yeah, so make sure to check on the credentials of the person you're bringing in. Cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Juliana.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Enlightened Pet Behavior Podcast. I hope you and your beloved pets have found valuable insights for a more harmonious life together. Please remember that this podcast provides educational information only and is not a substitute for professional veterinary or behavioral advice. If you need personalized support, please don't hesitate to contact me and we can explore how we can work together to achieve your pet behavior goals. You can reach me at enlightenedpetbehavior.com or via email at susan@enlightenedpetbehavior.com. Special thanks to Mac Light for composing the podcast's music. You can find him at maclightsongwriter.com. All these are in the show notes for